One.
Welcome in to Stop the Takes, football podcast focused on getting back to just talking ball. I'm Dakota, that is Austin, and we are live on YouTube. And I have the audio playing through my headphones of us going live. That was
There we
loud.
go.
We're live on YouTube to talk about our top 5 NFL offseasons. So we've done all of our draft content. We've kind of gone on a mini hiatus for some live show and new content other than the draft, but we've been pumping out those videos. And now we're going to take a look at our top 5 off seasons as a whole. So free agency, draft, everything involved. So how are we feeling, Austin?
Feeling pretty good, man. I think it's going to be a fun discussion. We do not know each other's list, which makes it so exciting. We'll see how many teams we have the same and if we have any ranked in the same spot. It's going to be interesting, man. Ready to get into it.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and kick things off by just mentioning a few honorable mentions. So we're going to start at the bottom and go to the top to our number one. So we'll kick things off with just honorable mentions of teams that just missed our lists. Do you want to go first?
Yes, my first honorable mention. I was debating 3 teams at number 5, and this team barely missed the cut. The Arizona Cardinals. Loved what they did in the draft. Loved what they did in free agency. Brought in Josh Sweat to finally get a pass rush. They really revamped the defensive line, which they really needed to do. They didn't focus on offense very much in the offseason, but I don't really think that's where the focus needed to be. I think their focus really needed to be defense. They have been lacking defensive talent now for years. And they really attacked that side of the ball, man. So love what the Cardinals did. They barely missed my top 5.
They are also an honorable mention for me. They did not make my top 5.
Love it.
So means it's more likely we have overlap here, but I completely agree with that. They were one that I debated as well. I just didn't know if they did quite enough offensively for me to want to put them on there. I think they needed to go more target a weapon alongside Marvin Harrison Jr. a bit more. But they did make some solid moves on the defensive side of the ball. All right, what's your other one?
Other honorable mention, a team that I heavily debated for the top 5. And this team was a team that kind of almost made this list at the buzzer, Dakota, with their latest move in the offseason, with the George Pickens trade, the Dallas Cowboys as an honorable mention. Almost in my top 5. Again, heavily debated it. Listen, they had a really good draft. I'll say it again, 3 first-round talents in the draft. And then the offseason, they also get credit for me for re-signing Adigizua, their defensive lineman. They got him at a really good deal, man. If you compare him to the deal Milton Williams got for the Patriots, he's a really good price. Very comparable player at literally the exact same position, and for a good bargain. So I think they get credit for that, signing him before he hit the free agent market. And then the George Pickens trade, man. It's going to be fascinating. We have a live video on the channel discussing the trade when it happened. But, I mean, giving Dak Prescott another weapon, basically making a George Pickens a number 2 receiver for the first time in his career, which is very intriguing to me. I really like what they did in the offseason, dude.
I agree with that one. I did not have them as an honorable mention, but my other 2, and I won't dive too deep into them, and you can let me know if they're on your list, but my other 2 that I had, because I had 3, were the Panthers. They did not make my list, and the Bucs.
Did not make mine either. Okay, 2 teams I debated, Dakota, but they're not on my list, and they're not in my honorable mentions. I don't think
I'm very curious now.
I don't think either of those teams did enough in free agency to me. Like they had very good drafts, but just not enough in free agency to make my list.
That's fair. And I think that the drafts carried heavily for me. And then again, part of like what they brought back or didn't lose. And I also think I kind of gave the Panthers props for not overpaying for Milton Williams. They tried to get him, but didn't. But yeah, I agree. That's why they didn't make my list. I was bigger fans of their drafts, but not quite the rest of their off season. So, all right. With that in mind, then let's jump into the list. Do you want to go with your 5 first or my 5?
I'll go. Are we going one by one here? Oh yeah. We're one by one. My number 5 is the Los Angeles Rams. Listen, this is a surprising one. I didn't expect them to make my list, man, because they didn't have like my favorite draft, but you have to include the trade back, man. To me, the Rams right now are a team that are close to competing for a Super Bowl. They're close, man. They're one of the best NFC teams. So they're a team that's ready to win now and can win now. if they have a run in the playoffs, they just signed Devontae Adams. That was one of their biggest.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge upgrade from Cooper Kupp, man. Now this receiving core, Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua, that's a lethal duo. Devontae can still play, man. He can still play. Even last year with the Jets, his play hasn't fallen off too much. I don't expect him to get like 1,500 yards or anything like that, but he's still a great player. And then they pick up an extra first-round pick in the draft for next year's draft. So to me right now, Dakota, they're the only team or one of the only teams that are set up to win now and set up for the future. Because, Matt Stafford isn't like a transcendent quarterback, right? He's not like Josh Allen, Mahomes, or whatever. They don't have as stacked as a roster as the Eagles. But what they do have is, again, a competitive enough roster to win right now and have set themselves up for the future where, okay, now they have 2026 first round picks. They can use that draft capital to potentially trade up, get a quarterback, or continue to move that draft capital into 2027, continue trading back and, future proof. So I love what the Rams did in the offseason, man. They're set up for now and the future. So I love it.
I like it. They did not make my list, but I love the fact that they didn't, because that is a good one. And they were an interesting one when I thought about the trade back weighs a lot. And I think you nailed it in terms of setting themselves up for the future. I think they weren't as much on my radar just because they weren't super active in free agency. But they did get Devontae, and I did like the Poona Ford signing as well, adding to an already loaded defensive line. And then, their draft was pretty solid overall as well.
Yeah, man. I also gave them credit for keeping Matt Stafford because there was rumblings in the offseason. They re-signed him, or at least they restructured his contract. And there was a lot of rumblings that he might get traded. And they're one of those teams where, to me, it didn't make sense to completely reset. It really didn't. I mean, last year they were competitive, super competitive, and signing Devontae Adams, bringing Matt Stafford back, and having all that draft capital. To me, I just loved it, man. Like I said, they're set up for now and in the future. So we'll see what they can do.
Love it. Now, that's a good point. What they were managed to keep, and the rumblings were pretty heavy there for Stafford. And I think they made the right decision too, because you get one more chance at. I mean, they were on the brink of they almost beat the Eagles in the playoffs last year. And if they do that, I mean, beating the Commanders, they could have done that as well. So they kept their win now window open, but also, to your point, prep for that future. So I like that. All right, my number 5, I know for a fact they're going to be on yours somewhere else. Okay. But my number 5 was the Patriots.
Yes, they are on my list.
Yeah, so where they fall on yours, we'll just touch on them now if that works.
Number 2, I had them pretty high. So number 2. Now, I kind of get why they're not higher for you, because their free agent moves are kind of questionable. Some of their free agent moves were overpays and things like that. So I kind of get that.
Yeah, so my reasoning behind putting them on here was, I think moving on from Gerard Mayo was the right call. I think, VFL, but to be honest, it's kind of crazy. He was like the coach in waiting anyway. Like that entire situation just felt range. But I like the variable hiring. I from a Titans perspective, what he did here, he was the classic, our roster was terrible at the end, and we won more than we should have. And to be honest, we were always better than what the roster really was. He had the issues and whatnot towards the end. But one thing that I have to give him credit for is that it definitely seemed like he did not want to trade A.J. Brown. That night in the war room, it seemed like he was not very happy with that. And I think that was kind of the undoing of everything. That's pretty much when everything fell apart. But he has a track record of overperforming for what the roster is, and I think the Patriots need that. And then, to your point, they had holes that they needed to fill, and they were also an interesting team that had a ton of money as well. And sometimes you have to overpay when your roster is terrible. And I did not love the contracts that Landry and Milton Williams got. Landry's a bit overrated from an edge rushing perspective. He's a bit more, he's a guy that gets to clean up, he benefits from the pressure internal a lot, and his win rate's not super high, but you needed a body there. Same thing with Milton Williams. You went and you had a guy you wanted to go get, and you went and got him. So they add that, and then I liked adding Carlton Davis and Spillane at linebacker, and then Stephon is an interesting signing.
It is.
Locker room wise, very intriguing, but I am a big fan of getting a guy that's a veteran wide receiver in the room for a young quarterback. You need a receiver who's been in the league a minute that can be dependable and reliable. And I know he's coming off of the injury, but I think he could be kind of a security blanket for Drake May. So I love the offseason moves they did there.
I did too, man. I loved a lot what the Patriots did. Obviously, I have them at number 2 on my list, but starting with the Vrabel hire, like you were talking about, he's always kind of coached his talent up, like his especially his defensive talent at Tennessee. Like they had a good roster on the offense, but defensively it was just kind of a bunch of guys, and they always kind of played above the talent they had. And I'll move on to the Landry signing, because I agree Landry was an overpay, and he's not productive in their like pressures or anything like that. He's really not a great edge rusher, specifically pass rusher. But it is interesting to me that he's paired with Mike Vrabel again, because he was decently productive under Vrabel when Vrabel was at Tennessee. So that is kind of interesting. And then Diggs, I agree with you, man. There wasn't a lot of options on the free agent market for receiver.
No.
He was one of the few options. Like, it was basically, are you going to trade for T. Higgins, or are you going to bring in a guy like Stephon Diggs or Chris Godwin, which Godwin never even hit the market. Exactly. Godwin never even hit the market because the Bucs re-signed him. So there really wasn't a lot of options. And that kind of moves me into my other point, why I kind of gave them a pass. They had to overpay for these players, like you said, Dakota. They had all that cap space, so it's really like it's an overpay, but since they had the money, it really didn't matter for the Patriots. And really there was not a lot of people wanting to go to New England, and there really wasn't. Players in general don't like playing in the cold. Like, they just don't. That's one factor. And the Patriots still have a lot of question marks. Now, they do have a great rookie quarterback, which I think they're doing right by him in this offseason. They shored up the offensive line. They did what they could at offensive line, bringing in Morgan Moses to plug a right tackle need, and of course drafting Will Campbell. But for me, the reason they're number 2 is because I think they probably had the best draft in the NFL. I think overall, if I was ranking draft classes, which we didn't do, we have draft reviews up on the channel if you want to go check out like the individual team draft reviews. But the Patriots, to me, if I ranked draft classes, probably what would be number 1, man. They got so many valuable players in the late rounds, like Braden Swinson in the 5th round. I think he'll end up being an extremely productive player for them. They did a lot of good work on the defensive line. Like you said, like we just talked about the Cowboys and Adiguzua versus Milton Williams. It is a bit of an overpay for Milton Williams, but again, it's a team that really needed that interior defensive line help, and you kind of had to if you're the Patriots. So, I mean, dude, I think overall, with what they had to work with, which, I mean, listen, they had a ton to work with. A lot of cap space, some draft capital, high draft pick. But I think they did it. They managed it pretty well overall.
Absolutely. Real quick shout out. We got a few people watching, so feel free to shoot a comment. We'll try to touch on anything anybody sends in the chat. Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, from a draft perspective, we touched on it in depth, in those videos. But Campbell and Jared Wilson could be starters on the offense. Campbell is, but Wilson could also be a starter on their offensive line. Adding Kyle Williams and Travion, weapons for Drake May. And then Braden Swinson along with Joshua Farmer on the defensive line. I love that. And then one other thing I'll give them credit for is, say what you will about, Josh McDaniels as a head coach, bringing him back as an offense coordinator who has
been good.
He got head coaching jobs twice because of that.
Exactly.
He's now back. So he's gotten head coaching jobs because he's done a good job as an offensive coordinator there. So I think that was a solid hire by Vrabel and not hiring a Todd Downing or somebody from the Titans days.
Yeah. I think that's a really good shout, man. I wasn't even considering that, but I agree with you. Like, I think when McDaniels isn't the head guy, like he isn't calling the shots, he's much better. Because he's a good offensive mind, and it's gonna be interesting for Drake May's development, who was really good with quite literally the worst supporting cast in the NFL last season. So it's going to be better. Like they've added
literally
weapons.
Has to be.
It has to be. It can't get worse. That's how bad the Patriots, surrounding cast was for Drake May last year. So it's going to be very interesting to see his development in year 2.
And that's a good point, because they had the 3rd overall pick, but I think most would agree they were the worst team in the NFL last year from a coaching perspective, from a roster perspective. It was just not good. And Drake May looked really good on a roster that was pretty bad. So add some pieces around that young quarterback. I will say for Patriots fans, I don't think you're competing for a Super Bowl in 2025, but you are laying the foundation for 2026 to be a huge year for this team. So love what they did to help build that.
I totally agree, man.
All right. Who is number 4 for you?
Number 4, the Washington Commanders, man. Loved what the Commanders did this offseason.
They are number 2 for me.
Okay, I love it. I loved it. I'll be honest. 2 through 4 for me were kind of interchangeable. I could see these things interchanging, but all these teams obviously they made our top 5, so they had great off seasons. I think the Commanders off season, I won't say it feels better than it might actually be, because of the Jaden Daniels hit. Like, they can't do any of this without Jaden Daniels. They wouldn't be trading for Laramie Tunsil had Jaden Daniels not shown what he showed his rookie season. But I love trading for Laramie Tunsil, man. The biggest issue with this team last season was the offensive line. Now, Jaden makes that a little bit worse sometimes because he holds onto the ball too long, but you don't want to take that away from Jaden. Like, that's what makes him special. So surrounding him with a great offensive line by trading for one of the best left tackles in the NFL, then using your first round pick on Josh Connerly from Oregon. I love it, man. Like, you completely fix possibly the biggest weakness on your team in a single offseason. You also bring in Debo, obviously. I mean, that's a huge weapon for Jaden. Who knows what Debo has left? But, you know, he's not going to be the number 1 wide receiver. He has Scary Terry still. So having Debo in kind of just a lesser role is going to be interesting. So yeah, man. Oh, and they brought in a ton of guys. I mean, I'm just looking at this offseason tracker. They re-signed and signed just a ton of guys for depth. This is a team that Dakota last year, they did not have a good roster. Like, they did not have a good roster. They got to the NFC Championship despite having one of the lesser rosters in the NFL. The difference was they hit on their rookie quarterback in a massive way. He has a chance to be elite. So, and I think they did really good with, you know, having him on a rookie deal, right, and surrounding him with this kind of talent. You can pay a guy like Laramie Tunsil because you don't have to pay Jaden Daniels right now. So loved what the Commanders did this offseason, man.
Completely agree, and that's why they're number 2. They're number 2 because I love replicating similarly to what the Texans did. You know, when you have, and it's ironic because they were both the 2nd overall pick with CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels, but obviously what we saw in 1 year, it's all projection from there in terms of what you think Jaden Daniels will be, but he showed enough that you can go all in. And even if you got this version of him every year, I think that's still enough to go and compete with. He was that good. And to your point, with an offensive line that wasn't that great and a supporting cast that was just kind of okay. I completely agree. I loved Laramie has his questions with penalties and like the locker room stuff, but I think Dan Quinn has created a culture immediately that I think you plug him in and make him be a part of it. And I think he's worth that because you need to lock down that tackle position. And then pairing that with Josh Connerly made so much sense. I mean, you were protecting your quarterback, who it appears to be the guy. So you've got to keep him upright. And then, yeah, the Debo trade, I love the value there. Like when we talked about the draft grade stuff, part of it was obviously the draft capital you have. They used picks on these guys. And if you just think about them using 2nd and 3rd and 5th round picks to get these guys in the building, I think it's worth it. And Debo adds a skill set that the offense doesn't have. You know, he is a big slot dude. I say big from like a bulky perspective. And Terry is great on the outside. Like, he's a true X. And I can't wait to see what Kingsbury does with him in terms of all the motioning. I don't know if he'll play the running back role sometimes like he did in San Francisco, but he's an incredibly versatile player that adds a lot of dynamic ability to that offense. And then you also pair that with Jalen Lane that they drafted. So I love that aspect too. They just kept throwing pieces onto this offense. And I love it. The defense, they you know, you probably knock them for maybe kind of neglecting the defense a little bit because it wasn't very good, and they kind of outperformed because Dan Quinn's defensive minded. But on the defensive side, I love the Trey Amos pick. That is great to add a guy who could start. And then I like bringing Bobby Wagner back on a short-term deal again, because he
locker room guy.
Exactly. He is a culture guy, and he played better than you probably thought he would last year at his age. The only thing I'll knock them for
It's
is
the
I don't
Kinlaw
disagree with getting
signing.
Javon Kinlaw, yeah,
Yeah,
but it's
he
just the contract they had to give him is a little tough. But again, they're kind of in the same boat as the Patriots, where like you got
exactly.
the money to spend. So
Yeah, I agree. That's like literally the only thing I would say with this like free agency class and draft class I didn't love for the Commanders was the Kinlaw signing. But again, the same thing that we said for the Patriots does apply. But I mean, I agree with a lot with what you said. And dude, I just love the fact that they weren't complacent, right? You just saw this offense explode. Like they exploded in 2024. They were phenomenal. And you could have gotten complacent with that. Said, okay, we have the pieces in here that we have. We can focus on the defense, kind of like what you were
yeah,
saying. We can focus on the defense because the offense is in a good spot. But they're being smart, right? They're seeing kind of like you just compared with the Texans. They're seeing what happened with the Texans and the Stroud regression. Like Jaden is that's a possibility, Commanders fans, that he does regress because that's how good he was his rookie season. So what do? They didn't get complacent. They went out and got Debo. They went out and got Tunzel. And I agree with you, man. With a team that has the cap space, it makes a ton of sense to use non-first round picks to go out and get good
yeah,
players. It makes so
I
much
love it.
sense to do that. So yeah, I totally agree, man. This is a team that could absolutely go on a Super Bowl run this year. That's absolutely in the Commanders' range of outcomes for this next season. And I think a lot of that is because of what they went out and did this offseason, man.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. It's like what the Rams did for multiple years, right? We're like, and they were
Yep.
trading first round picks for guys to get in the building, and it worked. Like that worked, and they still, and that's just good, management from Les Snead. But like to go and get guys like that, and then still be set up to never have to rebuild or reset. And I just like those moves. I think getting those guys in the building and focusing on making Jaden Daniels' life easier when he already exceeded probably everyone's expectations. I think you set him up to succeed. And if he does regress, you may be able to mitigate it a bit because you have this around him now. So excited to see what the Commanders do this season. Love what they did. And yeah, I'm rooting for Jaden as well. Like he's just a likable guy. So I want to see them succeed.
Agreed. You're number 4.
All right, I know they're probably on your list as well, so I'll jump into them. But it's the Las Vegas Raiders.
They are number
Ah,
3 on my list.
that
My
makes
next
sense. So
team. So
I'll start with the main thing, which was the Pete Carroll hiring. I I don't know what that means long term. He is old. He's in his 70s. Like I don't know how long he's going to be around,
but
but
he's a great coach.
he's a great coach, and the Raiders have not had a great coach for a long time. Like they have been churning through coaches left and right. So at the very minimum, you've fixed that. You've got a guy who has won at multiple levels, has done it consistently. It's really all he's ever done. Um, and then you pair that with the fact that the Geno trade.
Loved it.
I love that as well because Geno has entered into at very minimum. He is a good quarterback in the NFL. He's a good
Yep.
quarterback. And Pete Carroll's familiarity with him and bringing him into Seattle, which got him his kind of career revitalized. That connection, I can't wait, is exciting. And again, another hole the Raiders have had for a while, like since Derek Carr left. But even when Derek Carr was there, like there's an argument to be made that Geno currently is playing better than Derek Carr was for his last few seasons in with the Raiders. So those are kind of the main things. And like they had some few signings I liked as well, where they brought in Jeremy Chin. And letting some guys walk that I just don't think they needed to keep around, like K'Lavon Chaisson. And then I think they just did this recent, but they signed Devin White to like a $1 million deal. And I love that. The value of getting Devin White for that cheap, he's an okay linebacker, but getting a guy in there. But yeah, those are the kind of off-season things that stood out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I love what the Raiders did. Like you said, like you started with, man. It started with Pete Carroll, man. And Pete Carroll is old, and he's not going to be the coach in 10 years more than likely. I don't know, man. I mean, Pete Carroll's in good health. He could be. I won't say never, but Pete Carroll, dude, he just does such a good job at every place he's been at, dude. Every single place, every organization he's been at, he's just a great leader of men, dude. That's Pete Carroll. And I think it made so much sense pairing Geno Smith with him again. It just made too much sense for the Raiders. Like you said, it's been a hole for so long, and they've kind of been in weird draft position, kind of unlucky draft position where they could never get like their next franchise guy in the draft. And that was kind of the same deal in this draft. Like it was really like you could say it was a 2 QB class with Shadur, but Shadur had the off the field stuff, so it kind of made that
Right.
weird. So it was really just Cam Ward or nothing. And the year before that, they were in a similar position where like all the QBs were gone. At the point they were picking, it was literally 6 QBs off the board before they picked. Like all the 6 top guys. So they had no choice, man. They had to go out and get a QB this offseason. And for a 3rd round pick, bringing in Geno Smith, who is I would say easily a tier 2 quarterback in the NFL. He's not a top 10 quarterback, but a tier 2 quarterback, if you put the right pieces around that guy, can make a playoff run. And, I won't say they're not ready to compete for a Super Bowl, but they, who knows? But Geno's also interesting, man, because Geno's a little bit older, but he's a fascinating case study, right? For years in the league versus tread on the tires, because he was in the league for a while without playing, right? He wasn't playing for a long time. He was a backup for a decent chunk of his career. So he's going to be an interesting case study, man. Can he play longer than we would see typically, because he hasn't actually been playing as long, he's been in the league for a long time, but not actually playing. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see. And then I think you touched on a little bit, but the draft, man, they had a fantastic draft. They had one of the best drafts in the league, in my opinion. Just filled so many positions of need. Of course, got the face of the franchise and Ashton Jeanty. The Jeanty thing, like, we're going to debate, on this channel a lot. Like, is it worth taking a running back in the top 10, whatever? But at the end of the day, you got a blue chip player, and he's going to be the face of the Raiders. And that means something, man. All that means something to the franchise and to the fan base. I mean, the fan base is over the moon for the Jeanty pick, and I don't blame him, man. One of the best players in college football last year, if not the best player in college football. So loved what the Raiders did this offseason, man, and I think they're going to be better.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Geno is going into year 12, which is another one of those that just makes me feel old, of that 2013 class.
I know.
But to your point, he really only has like 5 seasons of fully starting and playing. Obviously, he's got the age, like, he still is, in his mid 30s, but he's not played that much. So he doesn't have the wear and tear, especially from a hit perspective, right? Like what Andrew Luck went through, where you're just getting beat down.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, I always have to.
Yeah, at least
anytime we talk about protecting young franchise quarterbacks,
he's the name that comes up.
He is. But yeah, I mean, he's coming off of 3 really good seasons in Seattle. This past one, touchdown interception ratio is a little bit rougher, which doesn't tell the full story. His completion percentage was a lot higher, and his PFF grading has been solid over the past 3 years as well. So I just think he's going to be the best quarterback they've had in a minute. And whether he can win you a Super Bowl or not is up for debate. But he can at least get the franchise into a better position where if, you can go get one, trade up, something happens to try to get to that next level. And yeah, to your point, the draft. I mean, Jeanty, we talked about it a little bit on their review. I could go either way in terms of like the running back value at 6, but he will be the face of the franchise. Like that is something they have lacked for a bit. And I think getting him in the building, there are going to be number 2 jerseys everywhere. I mean, people that aren't even Raiders fans are going to be rooting for that guy, which gets more eyes on the Raiders as well. And then the other things they did in the draft with Jack Besh and Dante Thornton Jr., 2 very different receivers, adding speed and underneath, O-line depth, and then Darian Porter and the other guys added on defense. So I think they had a very good offseason. They had a very good draft, and I think as a Raiders fan, you have to be in a much happier place than you've been in the past couple of years. And it's worth touching too on the quarterback thing, because if I remember correctly, I think they were fans of Bo Nix, and he literally goes to pick before them. And it's just
all 6 were gone. It's brutal,
missed. And nobody was going to trade back because so many of those teams wanted to take those quarterbacks or the elite wide receiver talent and offensive linemen and Joe Alt and Malik Neighbors. Like, people just were not willing to trade back up there. So their hands were tied.
Get a good consolation prize in Brock Bowers. That's a pretty nice consolation prize.
They got the best rookie tight end ever out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a great piece for Geno to have, because he's never had anything like that. So I'll be fascinated to see, how Pete Carroll does coming back. But with these pieces, I think the Raiders are in position to at least be a much better team than they were last year.
Yeah, they're going to be competitive, man. They might not make the playoffs because listen, they have a brutal division, and Raiders
Yeah.
fans know that. They know the division they play in. It's one of the best in the NFL, if not the best. I think the only competition is the NFC North, but which is interesting. We might be getting into an NFC North team here shortly, but yeah, man. I mean, they're going to be better. Like I don't see
Yeah.
them picking. They might pick in the top 10, but I would be kind of surprised. Like Pete Carroll just
Yeah, I would.
raises the floor of this team in a big way. So does Geno. So
Absolutely. So we'll see what the Raiders do. But let's move on to number 3. So
for
into
you,
our
and
top
I didn't
3.
have the Raiders were my 3. Your 3, I didn't have in my honorable mentions or my list. So I'm very curious what this team is.
Yeah, this is the one that I knew would be a wild card for you. So
Okay.
they are more of what they
Live
did
from the internet's red
So
carpet.
my number 3 team is the Philadelphia Eagles.
Wow. The
And
Eagles,
my reasoning.
the
Yeah,
rich get richer. Oh
The rich
no.
do get
Imagine
richer. Here's
being on a
why.
vacation for a very long
They
time.
did things so well as defending Super Bowl champs, in my opinion. They kept this team in a position to be able to immediately go win again, and they're loaded for the future still. So the things that I loved was we already touched on Milton Williams. I loved letting him walk. I loved letting Josh Sweat walk. They were paying Josh Sweat $10.5 million this past season, and they were paying Milton Williams $3 million. They went on to get 4-year $104 million for Milton Williams, and then 4-year $76 for Josh Sweat. And I love the fact that they didn't take on either of those deals. They got to maximize surplus value in terms of the minimal amount they were paying these guys and go win a Super Bowl with them, and then immediately move on and say, all right, we've drafted Jordan Davis. We've drafted Jalen Carter. We signed Byron Young in the offseason on the D-line. We've built the roster to be able to sustain letting you all leave and still be incredibly competitive. And I love that. And then same on the edge where they drafted Nolan Smith. They've got Nolan Smith. They signed Azeez Ojulari, and they have Moro Ojomo. So those moves I just loved of what they did on the defensive line, where their drafting paid off, where they could let these guys go and not have to overpay them. And then the Zach Bond signing I liked as well. I'm weirder about with signing a linebacker to a long-term deal, and he's a little bit older, but that was a position that they had more of a need at the time, right? Because they had Nakobe Dean, who was coming off of a major injury. So you kind of needed to lock up that level of your defense. And they got him for a decent deal, in my opinion. And then the other thing I give them a ton of credit for from the offseason, though, is they kept their coordinators this time. They didn't lose Vic Fangio, and they kept Tula around as well, which I don't know how much of head coaching candidacy is right, but like people ship to go be the same coordinator in other places. So they kind of kept the coaching staff together as well. So from an off-season perspective, that's what they did that I just loved.
Yeah, I mean, those are all really good points, dude. I'll start with the not signing the players, the kind of the homegrown talent, which is, I think, is something that the like really smart GMs do that some GMs like. I'll shout out my GM. I'm a fan of the Colts, Chris Ballard. He loves re-signing drafted Colts players. He has like a connection to that player, and sometimes it can hurt you, man. Because sometimes, like you said, the value's just not there. Like bringing Milton Williams back just made absolutely no sense for the Eagles because you can't afford that kind of contract, and he was. In all honesty, a role player for them. Now, a important role player, like he was a part of that defensive line that helped them win a Super Bowl, but he was still a role player nonetheless. It's not like we're talking about Jalen. We got Jalen Carter to pay, and that's a potential top 25 player in the entire NFL that we're talking about in Jalen Carter. So, like, it made sense that they wouldn't pay a guy like Milton Williams or Josh Sweat, who, again, were role players for them. And you also made a good point about the coordinators, man. Like, how often do we see a team win a Super Bowl and not have either of their coordinators poached? Now, I get Vic Fangio. He already had like his shot in the league as a coach, so he's likely not going to get another opportunity. But still, I think that matters. That does matter to keep your coordinators around. Because it helps, and that was kind of a big question for the Eagles, right? Like after the collapse of 2023, one of the big questions were the coordinators, like the coordinators, and they needed new coordinators and things like that. So that's really good for them. And then also in the draft, in the first round, I give them credit for that once again. They took the best player available in Jihad Campbell. He was a top 10 player for most NFL draft analysts, top 15, I'll say for most at least. And dude, they got him at 31, and it made sense. And they didn't necessarily need another off-ball linebacker, but what good teams do, they don't draft for need. They draft for the future, and that's what they did with Jihad Campbell. And so I agree, man. They had really good process for a team that just won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and to your point, like they lost Jonathan Gannon and they lost Shane Steichen when they were after coming off of Super Bowl appearance the first time around. So they lost both of them then. And now to come back around, win the Super Bowl this time and get to retain both of your coordinators, I think feels really good. And yeah, you touched on it. I forgot they also still have Bryce Huff. His deal's a little bit rougher now, but you've got him on the defensive line as well. They signed Josh Uche as well. So, I mean, they just added more depth behind the pieces that they've already homegrown, to your point, where they have drafted really well. And then the draft this year I loved. They got they got Jihad Campbell, which he could immediately step in, and with Nakobe's health concerns, he can be a guy that may end up having to take over that role, and he's incredibly versatile. And then Makuba, Ty Robinson, they added a lot more depth on the defense, added some OL depth, and then I like McCord as a potential young developmental quarterback to just kind of sit behind Jalen to be a solid backup for when you need him. Yeah, I just loved what they did. I think that it is a rich get richer situation. They made moves to me that makes it where it's hard to argue that they are the NFC favorite. And I think the NFC's in a weird state, but they are like definitively the NFC favorites again.
Dude, I totally agree. And I like what the Lions did this offseason, but what they couldn't help is losing both their coordinators. So we're talking about potentially, I mean, that was the number 1 seed last year. So probably the second best team in the NFC just lost both their coordinators to head coaching jobs and didn't necessarily do a ton in the offseason. Now, we just talked about the Commanders. Like, that's probably going to be like the number 1 team to me that will compete with the Eagles. I mean, they're in the same division and, obviously the same conference. So, but I agree with you, man. Like, it's hard to say the Eagles aren't the NFC favorites once again heading into 2025.
100%. And it is, defending Super Bowl champs, and they will be defending that pretty hard. So, yeah. Loved what they did, and I knew they would be my wild card on this list because, again, man, I loved a lot of what they didn't do or didn't lose, and that was what kind of drove it. And they had a really good draft again, so yeah. All right, so your number 2 was because we've got your 2 was the Patriots.
Patriots, right? Yep.
Yeah, my number 2 is the Commanders. So number 1, we have the same.
We do.
I know this.
We already talked about this. The Chicago Bears. Yep. Loved
Why
what
were they
did,
your
man.
number 1?
Loved what they did, starting with Ben Johnson, the kind of prize of the coaching pool, if you will. People have been trying to court Ben Johnson away from the Lions for, I mean, literally years now. At least a few years now, teams every offseason have been interviewing Ben Johnson, offering him jobs, and he's waited for the right place. And I think he picked the right place, man. You have Caleb Williams, who is... Let's not forget, he had a rough rookie season, up and down, I would say. Wasn't all bad. Wasn't like Bryce Young level bad. Not even close. It was up and down. Inconsistent, if you will. But as a prospect, I mean, best prospect since probably Trevor Lawrence. So he still has that potential in him. Now you add Ben Johnson, which arguably the most creative play caller right now in the NFL, I would say, with all his trick plays and things. I mean, he's been phenomenal with the Lions, man. He rose the Lions ceiling. He rose Jared Goff's ceiling while, coaching for the Lions. So that's number 1 for me, man. You add Ben Johnson, and right away you're already having a really good offseason.
Absolutely. And I know it's with coaching hires, obviously it's similar to the play, with players, like it is projection, but what he did for the Lions has been, their offense has been absolutely insane. And he's so schematically unique in terms of the way that he works things up. And you were completely right. He has been like the coveted hire for the past couple off seasons, and he's just turned people down. So they have to get a ton of credit for being the team that finally gets Ben Johnson. And I love pairing him with Caleb Williams. I think if anybody can unlock him, it's going to be him. And getting him back on track to the type of guy he could be, because all the news just broke today with the Caleb Williams stuff, and it's worth noting because part of the worry that the family had was Uberflus's and Grum's like they're coaching with him and hurting his development. And to be honest, it was kind of true. Like you can blame Caleb some if you want, but like they were right, and it's an unfortunate. It was horrible, and a horrible situation to be in as a rookie quarterback. And now you've got a guy in there who has, for all intents and purposes, kind of unlocked Jared Goff's full potential. Like he's playing better in Detroit than he did in any point for the Rams. And yeah, I just that alone I think carries a lot of weight. Is getting Ben Johnson in the room.
It has to, man. And then you add what they did to the offensive line. I mean, completely revamped their interior of the offensive line. Literally brought in 3 new starters. Traded for Jonah Jackson, excuse me. He's going to plug into a guard position. Traded for Joe Thuney, which was one of the best offseason moves in the entire offseason. Like if I was just ranking individual moves, trading for Joe Thuney, who's one of the top guards in the league still. He's still playing at that high of a level, and giving up a 4th round pick for that while Caleb Williams is under his rookie contract. That's just a genius move, man. It's moves. It's a move like the Commanders just made with Laramie Tunsil. It's very similar. With a rookie contract quarterback, you have the ability to make moves like that, and you give up essentially nothing. I mean, it's a 4th round pick, dude, for Joe Thuney, who's potentially a future Hall of Famer. And then Drew Dahlman at center. I mean, you completely revamped that interior of that offensive line, and your tackles are kind of set, man. Braxton Jones played well last year. Darnell Wright is starting to look really good. So like all of a sudden this offensive line, which was an issue, but I will say it was an issue that was amplified by Caleb Williams' play, by holding on to the ball too long. And he was one of the worst quarterbacks last year as far as, pressure to sack percentage, which is, that's a QB stat, man. A lot of sacks that QBs take are on them. And that's one thing I think fans don't realize. They look at box scores and they're like, oh man, Caleb was sacked 8 times, so the offensive line must have been atrocious. Well, it's like partly the offensive line, but partly Caleb. But I think raising the baseline of the offensive line will help Caleb in a way, because I think some QBs, like they automatically, if their offensive line is so bad, they amplify it because they think it's just going to give in right away. So they already start scrambling from the pocket and hold on to the ball too long. And they just kind of create that habit. And it will also be interesting, going back to our Ben Johnson point, can Ben Johnson get some of that out of him? Because Ben Johnson's really good at just scheming guys open. So just taking the easy stuff when he can take it. And that will help him get rid of the ball quicker. But yeah, man, I think their offensive line is going to be, potentially could be, develop into one of the best in the league with these moves.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously Ben Johnson has gotten very used to having a good offensive line, because the Lions have had a top 3, top 5 line for his entire time there. And it's obvious that he cares about that, because they immediately made these moves. And the value of getting Thuney for that, having a veteran guy like that too, to come in and anchor down the line and kind of be a leader for that group now as well, that has younger guys on it. Where Braxton Jones and Darnell were drafted just 2-3 years ago. And then Dahlman, he was kind of one of the biggest, free agent offensive linemen out there. I mean, he was like the top center by far, and they got him. So he locks down the middle. And then the trade for Jonah Jackson, I completely revamping the interior of that offensive line was a necessity. And then to your point, Darnell Wright looked much better in year 2. He looked really good. Braxton Jones is, hit or miss, but you taking weight off of him. If you plug in Joe Thuney next to him now, his life's going to get a little bit easier. And they drafted, we'll touch on their draft a little bit, but Ozzie Trapillo, who could compete for that job at some point. But, revamping the offensive line was an absolute necessity. And to your point, I literally saw a clip earlier today on Twitter. It was every single 20-plus yard air, pass by Caleb Williams. And there was a lot of ugly in there, but I think it was because of what you touched on. That was a guy who played panicked. Yep. Like the second the ball was snapped, the dude was worried he was about to die. Like it was obvious that he was throwing as if he was under pressure even when he wasn't, which is not a good habit to get. But that happens to, I mean, to be honest, it's Will Levis-esque too. Like when you put a quarterback in a situation where the offensive line is that bad, you're going to create bad habits. So to go ahead and stifle that in year 2 was a fantastic move to avoid letting that develop into a true issue for Caleb Williams, who is known for playing. And I think he had to find this out the hard way too, to your point. He extends plays, but in the NFL, it is not as easy to do that as it is in college in the defunct Pac-12, where you could run around and do whatever. So yeah, I think that was an absolute necessity to fix the offensive line, and it should hopefully help fix the issues that Caleb Williams had last year. He will always make them look worse, to your point. Like that is just the way he plays. But having a good offensive line as the foundation should help mitigate that.
And I wonder how much Ben Johnson had his hand in this. Obviously, he's not the GM. He's not the acting GM. Ryan Pace is, but still, it would, I mean, like you said, dude, he got used to having literally arguably the best offensive line in the NFL. It was top 2 with the Eagles. Like people debate, is it the Eagles or the Lions? It's basically those two. And I mean, to me, when you get 3 new starters, I mean, not a lot of teams are adding 3 new starters to an offensive line in an offseason, all on the interior. That tells me the head coach probably had something to do with that. Like he's like, listen, we got to raise the level of this offensive line. We have to. And I don't think they could have handled it any better. Like as far as how they replaced those starters, I think they did literally the best they could in the offseason. So I thought it was fantastic. They also added defensive line depth. Dayo Odeyingbo. Yes, you think I would know that as a Colts fan? I do know Dayo. He made a lot of good plays, man. He's a situational pass rusher. I wouldn't say he's a starting caliber player. But on the contract they gave him, he's not really getting starter money. So I think he's a good addition. And then of course they added Grady Jarrett. Not sure how much Grady Jarrett has left in the tank. Was a great player at one time. I just don't know how good he will be now. But still, I mean, you know, adding that to the offensive line additions, man, overall great free agency class.
Yeah, and I think to your point too, like Ryan Poles, I don't know if he hadn't fixed the offensive line yet, right? Like he hadn't gone and done it himself. So it does make you think.
I said Pace, my bad. Ryan Poles.
Yeah, it does make you think that Ben Johnson came in and was like, this has to happen. Like, I genuinely wonder if even like at like a interview process when he's like talking to these teams, like, are you almost making promises of what you're going to do for the roster? But you know what I mean?
That's a great point.
Like, it's got to be something that happens where, and that could have been why he didn't take some jobs where he's like, well, you're going to have to go do these things before I even consider taking this job. And it looks like Poles was like in ownership. They were like, yeah, House Fedler, we'll do it. And they did. And yeah, your point, the 2 defensive lineman signings, you know, they needed to add depth there. That's probably the one place they neglected the most, I would say, in the entire offseason for their free agency or the draft. They only drafted Shamar Turner, who will be able to probably play sooner rather than later because Grady's probably going to have a snap count of what he can do. But leadership-wise, locker room guy, you want a guy like Grady Jarrett in there. But offensively, though, continuing on this mentality of building around Caleb, Colston Loveland, whether we think it was a reach at 10 or not, that's a dynamic weapon you add to the offense. Luther Burden, we love. You and I both wide receiver 2. Getting him in the second round to pair with that suddenly makes it 10 times better. You're like, wow, they just walked away with a starting tight end and a starting receiver from the draft. First 2 rounds.
The ceiling of this pass catching core is so high for the Bears. Like you still have the ceiling of Rome Odunze, which I think we've kind of been jaded to young wide receivers because we're so used to guys like Jamar Chase or Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas Jr. just coming in and lighting up the league. But that's not always the case for everyone. Like Rome Odunze still has high end potential in the NFL. And, you know, DJ Moore is what he is. He's a solid number 2. And then Luther Burden, man, which I think is just an intriguing draft pick, man. Like, especially with Ben Johnson, like adding that to Ben Johnson with Luther Burden's skill set. Again, another pick that I think Ben Johnson had his hands on, dude. I really do. And then Colston Loveland, like in our draft video, we said it was a reach. It was a bit of a reach in the draft. However, it is intriguing, man. Like, he's an intriguing prospect who has potential to be, if it can become a top, 5 to 8 tight end, then all of a sudden it's not a reach. It's a fantastic pick. And
Right.
I think that is in his range of outcomes. I would have ranked Tyler Warren ahead of him, but still, man, I think it is intriguing adding that to the Bears offense. And now, like I say, I believe, this has one of the highest ceilings as far as a receiving, because we don't really know what Roma Dunze is. We obviously don't know what Luther Burden and Colson Loveland are. And you add Ben Johnson to the mix, like, this could be a really good core of pass catchers.
And back up, getting a Dunze moved up the depth chart. I think, the Keenan Allen experiment for 1 year was a good idea, and I'm glad they didn't revisit that, let him leave and draft Luther Burden instead. Let Roma Dunze step into more of a true number 2 role and continue to add pieces there. And then in terms of the other guys they let walk, they let Tevin Jenkins go, which works out perfectly because they fixed the interior of the offensive line. So letting the pieces leave that they did, I think, just opened up for making the roster a little bit better. And then, the other pieces on the defensive side that they added through the draft with Ruben Hippolyte at linebacker and Zoff Frazier at corner, who's an interesting piece that could find a way path to the field sooner rather than later. Love that. And then they also added some depth at wide receiver behind those big three of, Zacchaeus, who is a solid option as a 4th or 5th. I love that. And then Devin Duvernay. And then also Kyle Monangai. That was probably the one thing people expected, was obviously them attacking running back a bit more. And it's funny because we talked about this, I think, on the review, that Ben Johnson, one of the first things that happened when he got to Detroit was he was like, DeAndre, get out of here, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. That is interesting.
Time to go. So I'm surprised a little surprised, but at the same time, like, he's good enough. And so is Roschon Johnson. And then you add Kyle Monangai. You have 3 solid running backs there now you can rotate through. And, with an offensive line that good, this is going to be a good example of offensive line usually matters more than the running back anyway. And now that you've rebuilt the offensive line, and Ben Johnson is a very analytically driven guy, so I guarantee that's part of the philosophy is if we just have a good enough offensive line, it doesn't really matter who's back there. We can worry about that later. So they just, from start to finish, if you're a Bears fan, besides the news today being a bit weird, I don't think you could be happier with the current state and outlook. And every year the Bears are one of those teams where the fans are, claiming Super Bowl victories. They're notorious for that. And I get it. Vols fans, we deal with that on a daily basis, but now it's like that division is about to be fascinating. And probably it's probably easy to say it's the best in the NFL going into next season.
Agreed.
But going to be fascinating.
It is going to be fascinating, man, because although we just got done saying it's the best in the NFL, it does feel like every other team is vulnerable, right? The Lions literally just lost both their coordinators. The Vikings are essentially playing a rookie quarterback because J.J. McCarthy has not played yet. The Packers are like kind of status quo, right? I mean, they're just like, okay, we add Matthew Golden in the draft, and that's pretty much it. And I don't know if that's good enough with what everybody else has done in this division. So, like, if Caleb develops and looks like that prospect people thought he could be, like, the Bears could absolutely take this division next year, dude. Absolutely, that's in the cards.
And the NFC is just in an interesting state in general, where it feels pretty wide open. Outside of, obviously, we talked about the Eagles. Like, it is theirs to lose. But, like, the rest of the NFC is fascinating, whether it's the Commanders, the Rams, the Packers. Don't really know what the Cowboys are going to be anymore. So, like, in terms of securing a playoff spot, like, that is 100%. To be honest, it should be the minimum expectation for this Bears team now is to be a wild card team.
Absolutely.
But the NFC in general, because actually looking at this, like, the top 3 of my teams were in the NFC.
So it's getting better.
It's getting better. It's getting competitive. That's for sure. But yeah, the Bears love what they did. I knew when we were doing this, when we weren't going to talk to each other about our list, I think we both knew the Bears were probably going to end up being number 1.
Absolutely. Agreed, man. They had a fantastic offseason.
All right. They win the award for Stuff That Takes Best Offseason for 2025.
Hang the banner.
Hang the banner. Any closing thoughts wrapping up the top off seasons for?
No, man. I'll say that a lot of these teams had great off seasons, dude. A lot of these
Yeah.
teams, like some of your honorable mentions that you brought up, I'm like, he's right. The Panthers probably should have been in the conversation. And then the Eagles, like there was just a lot of really good off seasons. A lot of teams got better. A lot of good teams got better. I mean, you had the NFC champion, the Super Bowl champion, and the NFC runner up in your list.
Yep.
So
At the top
I
three.
mean, exactly. Like those are good teams. Like the rich get richer, if you will. But also bad teams got better. The Patriots, the Raiders, like some of these like bottom feeding teams have gotten better. So I think a lot of teams had great off seasons, man.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of this comes back to the draft stuff as well, is that we loved a lot of teams' drafts. So that's part of what made it all difficult is when you looked at the drafts, we loved a lot of them. A lot of teams drafted really well. There weren't really many bad drafts.
Yeah.
And even one of the teams that I didn't think had a great one started to linger in my mind, which was the Vikings. Because again, I was getting caught up in loving what teams didn't do. And I loved the fact that they just let Darnold leave. I thought that was the right decision. So things like that weighed a lot. But yeah, overall, a lot of teams got better. It's fascinating to see how things play out this season. Schedule just released, so now we're all get to circle all the matchups for this season. The first Commanders-Eagles rematch from the NFC Championship game will be fascinating. But a lot of young quarterbacks as well. With Jaden Daniels. So we had three of the teams on our list all had rookie quarterbacks from last season.
Rookie
as well.
contract QBs.
Exactly. That's always going to play a role in having a good offseason because you've got to take advantage of, like, if in this, like we touched on with Jaden Daniels, what we saw is enough to think this guy is our franchise quarterback. And if you're assuming he's your guy for the next 10 years minimum, right now, today, is the cheapest he will ever be for you. Like, definitively. That's just a statement of fact. So what can you do to maximize that value? And I think they did a good job of that, and the Bears went and did a good job of that, and the Patriots. They'll even have more cap space next year. I'm sure next season's free agency class can be better than this one because that made things a little tough for teams because there just wasn't a lot of big names out there to go get. And a lot of the bigger ones, like Chris Godwin, like you noted, just immediately re-signed, so they were never really on the market. So interesting stuff.
It is, man. Fun episode.
Well, yeah, that was fun. We got to do more things where we don't know what the other's going to talk about. So it's random. We won't have as many cool overlays for people, but we'll figure it out. But we appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you join this live, please like, share, subscribe, leave us a comment. Let us know what your top 5 was or your thoughts on our top 5s or any teams you thought had a really good offseason. Love to see your all's thoughts. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in tonight. And until next time.
Thanks for talking ball with us.